Muy bien.
Very well. I would also like to thank Dr. Carlos Ivan also for the very efficient use of this non-renewable natural resource which we are losing all the time, which is time. We are going to move on to the last presentation. We will have Mr. Rogelio Conde Garcia, the General Director of Linking Innovation and Regulations for Civil Protection. A very interesting position. We are going to listen to his presentation based on policies changes focused on governance and institutional strengthening in the Mexican case.
Tardes.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like you to convey a very warm greeting from Mr. Enrique Peña Nieto, President of Mexico, Ángel Osorio Chong, Secretary of Governance, and Luis Felipe Puente Espinosa, National Coordinator of Civil Protection. It is for me a great honor to be able to join you and share with you the work that we're carrying out in our country regarding risk prevention. In Mexico, the National Council for Civil Protection is led by Mr. Enrique Peña Nieto, who is also the president of this National Council. Likewise, the 31 governors of the country participate, as well as the head of government of the federal district. We must point out that each one of the representatives of the dependencies of federal public administration is also a part. It's not only the operational areas like the Army, like the Navy that tend to disasters, but all of the federal institutions have a function and responsibility in this council. Senators and federal members of the Congress also participate. If you would allow me, in the next few slides, I would like to remind you the risks that Mexico is facing. Our geographic location makes us highly vulnerable to tropical cyclones from both oceans. The image that we can see in red the historical pathways of tropical cyclones that we have recorded. In the last 4 decades, 1,171 cyclones occurred, out of which 209 impacted the national territory. 1 out of every 6 touches land in Mexico. On average, we have 26 tropical cyclones that occur. We must point out that only one of them can cause severe damages. Their pathway is very complex and depends on many factors, and the forecast can change from one moment to the next. We can see in this image an example of an erratic phenomenon. Hurricane Barbara was heading west without causing much harm, but it unexpectedly switched pathways to the east and hit our country. And a stationary phenomenon was Raymond, which, as we can see in this video, was almost static for 48 hours in front of the coast of Mexico, affecting 5 states. It's relevant to mention the example of another phenomenon which did not hit ground and caused severe harm. It was Manuel. It wasn't a hurricane, it didn't hit land, and yet its presence more than 275 kilometers off Acapulco caused great damages and the evacuation of almost 40,000 people. We can see on the screen how the cloud bands of Ingrid and Manuel covered practically all of the national territory, presenting an interaction between both cyclones that caused rainfall in almost all of the national territory and affected 23 federal institutions. Our territory is exposed to the interaction of 5 tectonic plates. This causes the permanent possibility of experiencing a very strong earthquake. It was precisely in the earthquake of 1985 when in our country we began building what today is our national system for civil protection. In the center of our territory we have a volcanic axis where 31 volcanoes are deemed to be potentially sensitive. We must highlight Popocatépetl volcano, which is permanently supervised due to its constant microseismic activity. Another phenomenon that affects our territory is drought. In the last 10 years, we have found two significant events. In 2006, almost 70% of the territory was affected, and 15% of those were extreme. In 2011, 92% of the territory was affected, and 40% of it with extreme drought, which made it the most intense drought event in the last 70 years. We must add to this the presence of cold fronts and frostings. We can see here some recent events that make changes in climate quite evident. We have had severe hailstorms that have reached 50 centimeters in depth. This shows us that seasons are no longer well defined, but that hydrometeorological risks are latent at all times, everywhere. In this graph, I would like to show you how our system works. We can see the monitoring room sends to the National Civil Protection Service this information, and we're the ones who warn the entities. Our institution is in charge of carrying out a permanent analysis of the information and to permanently monitor the issue to detect any change in the characteristics of the behavior of any phenomenon. With this information, we can begin warning procedures or specific operations that will safeguard lives. Our public policies by law and actions in matter of civil protection are coherent with the Hyogo framework of action and international agreements signed by Mexico to guarantee human safety. This is why we aim to consolidate the National Emergency Center, which will strengthen the National Risk Atlas and will allow for efficient and timely warning national system. We would like to increase investment on prevention and reduce expenditure on reconstruction, promote a culture of prevention amongst the society, and encourage the participation as well as the participation of the private sector for risk mitigation. The National Emergency Center is a joint effort of all of the institutions of federal administration as well as NGOs in order to maintain permanent monitoring 24 hours a day of the situations that can generate risk which can affect life or human life or property. The information is regularly updating the national map of risks. Currently, this map doesn't register all possible phenomena and only allows to establish monitoring and warnings for local authorities. We are aware of the importance of developing a tool that will incorporate not only monitoring and warnings, but that allows also for simulation, modeling, and analysis of the information. For this, we are building a modern system that will have state-of-the-art technology without undermining the current infrastructure. We aim for the national risk map to be a dynamic, useful, and reliable tool for decision-making in the most important aspects, which are basically avoiding risk and urban planning and territorial development. The Atlas should take the technology and apply it into actions for prevention and mitigation of risks, and should help us to strengthen a more resilient society faced with the risk phenomenon. The national warning system is complementary to the map, and it allows us to issue warnings in real time through any technological means, be it radio, TV, cell phone, social media, physical warnings, and any other communication mechanism of the possible risk situations. So this system would allow us to allocate roles and responsibilities of institutions as well as of people when facing possible contingencies. We can also issue focused warnings and segmented to the high population, high-risk populations. We have financial mechanisms for these actions, for preventing finances preventive actions to reduce risks. Fonden is an instrument that has as its goal to provide help and assistance in situations of emergency and disasters. The fund acts as an insurance of the Mexican government to cover the costs for rebuilding after disaster, and it has a minimum annual budget set by law. We believe that in the midterm, all of the federal institutions should have their own disaster attention fund. We must promote the use of financial mechanisms of risk transfer like bonds, international funds, and private insurance, which undoubtedly will help us reduce the financial burden of prevention and reconstruction. Amongst the actions that we are disseminating, culture actions, we are disseminating graphs, informatory graphs on the different risk phenomena. They are distributed permanently to the civil protection state units, and they are available on our website. We have put together 120 capsules in different languages, benefiting more than 1,600,000 inhabitants of indigenous languages. We have continued our efforts of linking and working with the business sector, the private sector of our country, such as the civil association United for Them, made up of private companies and civil organizations of relevance in our country. This coordination helps gathering and distributing assistance donated by the Mexican society, making resource management transparent. Those resources that are destined to those who have lost it all. We must continue strengthening our relationship with the business sector, finding better mechanisms of collaboration and transparency for the collective well-being. We have the basis of actions of prevention, and we're also giving greater strength to our law on this issue. It is very important to harmonize the state laws to have a very coherent framework. No country is free of risk of any big or a large magnitude event, and no one is ready to face it on their own. So we have to carry out the necessary work to exchange experiences and be every day better prepared and have a regional strategy clearly defined of actions and measures in case we require someone to give us a hand, and we need to give people a hand as well. Thank you very much. And preventing is living.